So, I hate being a detractor. I hate being someone who's negative. It's not something I normally like doing, but it is what it is. But I do want to talk about this. It's a bit of a rant. Also, really not. But we'll see. I want to talk about... It's not lackluster. I mean, it's kind of lackluster. But I want to talk about the lack of hype that is around UFC 312, du Plessis versus Strickland 2. I mean, if we're going to look at this card, I mean, there's like, okay, I think the main event and the co-main event are just fine. I think there's no big deal with them. They're good fights. They're interesting. I don't hate them. I think Strickland's entertaining. I think Dreykus is entertaining. Tatiana's incredible fighter. Zhang Weili's climbing the ranks of GOAT female fighters of all time. So I don't hate that. I think the main and the co-main are solid. But they're not enough to carry the entire card. Right? Yes, it's technically Australia, New Zealand against the world. I get that. For the rest of the card. Right? I get that's the theme here. I mean, we're looking every fight except for, what, one fight? Two fights? There's an Aussie or a New Zealander on it. Or a Kiwi. Whatever you guys prefer. But it's not like these fights stand out. Right? We have Justin Tafa versus Talashin Teixeira on the main card. I mean, let's look at their, one guy's from the Contender Series, one guy is a vet. I don't hate that, but it's not a fight that belongs on the main card. This card is lacking, not bad fights. I think these fights are good, but it's lacking the marketing appeal of saying, oh, 312 is incredible. If you were able to get Dan Hooker and Justin Gaethje on this card, people immediately would be like, and you move Tafa out, and you put him featured on the prelim, people will be like, whoa, this card is really good. Because you have a fight like Dan Hooker versus Justin Gaethje, which is on the next card in Las Vegas. And you look at Vegas, and you're like, whoa, Vegas is good. Because you have Alex Pereira versus Magomed Ankalaev, which I think will be a good fight. It's not going to be a banger. But then you have Justin Gaethje versus Dan Hooker. And that's a fight. That's a fight with names, and we know it's a good fight. I think the UFC here, they know what they're doing. I get that. And obviously, like, you have a Topuria on the card, and he's on the prelims. That's fine. I get that, because Topuria is debuting. So, that's cool. And what I think is also really interesting here is Ilya is going to be cornering Alexandre, and then you have Alexander Volk, who's going to be cornering Colby. So it's an interesting dynamic. But, the problem is we're trying to pick and choose, how good this card is or how bad this card is and so on and so forth. And I think that's where we run into these issues where we're like, well, what do we do? Right? I think there's maybe not a lot of big names that are available at this time. But I do think we should have gotten even a third title fight. A third title fight would just make this card incredible, right? We go to Australia once or twice a year, fine. But it needs to be a card that deserves it, right? And I think when you have, like, a fight like this, or, like, Jimmy Crute versus Rodolfo Bellato, like, these aren't names that you go home and you're like, oh, my God, I got to watch that. I got like, for us on the East Coast, oh, my God, I have to, stay up at 10 p.m., and watch until 2 in the morning to watch Jimmy Crute versus Rodolfo Bellato. You know what I mean? It's tough. Like, I don't hate these fights. But they're not fights that get me out of bed and I'm like, oh my God, like, I need to order the pay-per-view right now. And you're charging people $70, $80. Like, this fight's fine. Love this fight. Zhang Weili and Tatiana, love it. These two fights are worth it to me. But, I think this is one of those cards, and I think it's just unfortunate because we're coming off of, 311 with Islam and Islam versus Hinata Moicano, right? And that was a good card. It was a great card, and it was in Los Angeles. You had Merab and Umar. Great fights. You had Yuri and Jamal. So we're coming off of this high of, and then, this past weekend, Saudi Arabia with Izzy and Imavov. So we're coming off of these cards that have been absolutely just banger after banger after banger. And now we're going to 312 where, these names aren't as big right now. So I think it's more of like a question of what do we do, right? We know these fights are going to be good, right? I do think Colby and Alexandre is going to be a really, really fantastic fight. I think the early prelims are something left to be desired. That's fine. But you look at the rest of this card, these are going to be good fights. But it's just not star power. So we're like, in our minds, we think, Rafael Fiziv's not on this card. I don't really care. The names aren't as great. Okay, that's okay. Not every pay-per-view is going to have star power throughout the card. It's not a UFC 300 we're talking about here. We're talking about 312. We're talking about Australia. And, should there be some bigger names maybe on the card? Sure. I wish we got Kamaru Usman versus Jack Della Maddalena. That would have made this card just twice as good. Or a Rob Whittaker versus Caio Borrario. Twice as good. It's tough, man. Izzy lost the title almost a year and a half ago, right? It's a little about a year and a half ago. Sean lost the title a year ago, and now Dricus has been, on a tear. Dricus is quickly becoming a top 5 middleweight of all time, if he's not already. You got Silva, you got Izzy, Rob. I hate to admit it, but you got Anderson, Izzy, Rob. You could arguably say Chris Weidman and then Dricus. I think the names are like the names he's clearing. It's just racking up for him. So, you look at the guys who he's beaten. I think he's undefeated pretty much, right? What is he? One loss? He's 22-2, right? And you look at this win streak this guy's on. He's never been beaten in the UFC. Respect. And it's not like he's facing trash cans. He's facing the best of the best when they're good. So, Dricus deserves a little more respect than people give him. Same with Strickland. I understand his fights are not the most entertaining, especially against Paulo. But the guy comes to scrap. So you got to give him, props for that. But let's pump the brakes a little bit. Yes, there's a bit. It's not like downtime, but you look at what's after that. Cejudo versus Song. That's gonna be a banger main event. But let's look at the rest of that card. Yes, we have some really good fights. There's actually a fight missing here. Where's Jared Cannonier and Rogerio? Whatever. But either way. You look at the main card here. You got Brendan Allen, Anthony Hernandez. Great fight. Jean Silva. Fantastic name. Rob Font, Dominic Cruz. This fight night, yes, is better than the pay-per-view of 312. So, yes. But it's like they're coming back, and they haven't been to Seattle in a long time. So, respect. Right? So, it's like, it's tough. It's tough. Then you got Brandon Royval versus Manel Kape. This fight is a banger. But you look at the co-main. Cody Brundage versus Julian Marquez. Nasrat Haqparast versus Esteban Ribovics. That's a great fight. Also, I know Usyk just got moved up to the Mexico City main event against Moreno. Which, if Moreno wins, he should get a title shot. Same with the winner of this fight. But, you look at, and then we go into 313, which is going to be, okay, right here. Not many people are going to know who that is. No one's going to really care. Even though I think both these fighters are really good. Lemos is incredible. And Luciano's really good too. But you go through the card and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. There's not some crazy names here. But it's because you have this fight that people are saying 313 is just better. You got Vittori Delice too. I don't hate Delice and Vittori, but this fight's going to be not a snooze fest, but it's going to be a decision. We know it. Edwards and Maddalena. Great fight. But you got Blachowicz and Ulberg. That's going to be a banger. So it's picking and choosing your battles here. And I think 312 is just one of those cards that is just not name value. But fight quality value is there. So let's pump the brakes on that. We'll do our official... We're going to introduce something new with this card. we're going to introduce a UFC 5 predictions for some of the fighters, and we'll go from there, and we'll do them in increments and all that kind of stuff, and you guys will see. But anyway, guys, thank you so much. We're off to the races with UFC 312. Welcome to Fight Week. See you guys.